Chris, welcome to the Virtual CMO podcast. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Hey, Eric, it's lovely to see you, and congratulations on the show.
Oh, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We have so much fun doing this show, and it's great to have guests on like yourself that can truly add value to our audience. We're always trying to help businesses figure out ways to improve their marketing strategy to get more effectiveness from the marketing tactics that they're running. And I know today we're going to get a chance to talk with you all about, brand voice and really creating that voice for your company. And I was wondering, first of all, if we could just start with a little bit of background on yourself. Tell us how you got into this branding and how you've been helping companies develop that brand voice.
Sure. So I suppose the origins of what I'm doing as a business with verbal identity is that I suppose you go back 30 years. So 30 years is a long time in what's happened in the marketing world. In those days, I was a copywriter in an ad agency in London, working on big accounts like British Airways. And if you were a writer, then it was a really wonderful world, because I was considered a high producer because I produced maybe 5 ads in a year, right? Crazy, 100 words. That's what made my living in a year. I set up a boutique agency in 2000, working with lots of wonderful B2B, B2C clients, different sizes. And over time, as the number of brand channels exploded, then what I found was each time I left a meeting, a client would kind of grab me by the sleeve and say, "Hey, Chris, you're a good writer. We've now got 4,000 words to write before breakfast tomorrow. Help us." And that was their CRM, that was their website, that was social media, that was the higher rate of turnover in packaging, the higher rate of communications in customer service, all of that. So about 10 years ago, I realized that if I was being asked this all the time, I should really look at how brands can position themselves with language. Because I reckon everyone that listens to you has got a great visual identity. They would know what their logo is, and they would know when it's wrong. They would know what their font is, their color palette is. But if you said to them, how well defined is your verbal brand? Is your verbal identity as strong as your visual identity? I'm not sure how many people would say, hand on heart, yes, it is. So that's how the business started.
That's really interesting, because I would agree. I don't think a lot of people think about that. You're right. There are style guides that created the talk all about how the logo needs to be presented and what colors to use and the fonts and whatever, but not necessarily what to say other than maybe a tagline or, a brand marker or something like that. So how would you describe verbal identity or the voice of a brand? How do you sort of get to a place where you can start to solidify what that really means?
I think the first stop is understanding where language is working for your business. And the short answer is everywhere, all the time. But you need to be able to define the voice, because often it's in the founder's head or the marketing department. Someone in their department is a really great writer. And if you want something written, go and ask Eric. Eric's got the voice. Eric knows. Eric will do it. And of course, Eric needs to take a holiday. Eric may occasionally get sick, get married, or have other personal commitments. So Eric can't do it all the time. So often what you're doing is you're extracting it from the head of the people in the business that know what the voice is intuitively, even if they haven't defined it rigorously.
So this is more than brand values, what a brand stands for. This is really how they're communicating those values, how they're presenting themselves to the marketplace.
Yeah. And I think many brands do it inadvertently, which is often, a route to disaster, because you're just kind of saying, well, we'll just put some stuff out on social media and we'll just, let's just write the customer service letter as quickly as we can. And let's do this with the CRM. But you would never do that with your visual identity. You would be really careful, just as you said, to have this comprehensive deck that says, this is what we do on this occasion. This is how we vary it by this moment or by this channel. And so once you have the voice defined, and once you learn how to flex it for different channels, then I think what you see is that you have a voice that suddenly becomes as strong as the other elements in your brand.
Can you maybe walk us through that a little bit, maybe with a current client or a past client, in how you sort of defined what that voice was going to be, and some examples of what you put in that verbal style guide to help guide
Yeah,
other people in how they would write in that voice?
sure, sure. I think at the heart of what we do, well, I know what, at the heart of what we do is a really simple framework that we've used and reused and proven over the last 10 years. And do you mind if I talk about that just for a
Oh,
couple of
please,
minutes?
please.
And then, oh, thanks. So a lot of people think the brand voice is just tone of voice. And often if that's if that's what you think the brand voice is, then you come up with 4 adjectives: human, friendly, warm, and approachable, which doesn't really help the writer. I
Mm.
always say, think about the writer, 7:10 at night, she or he, they've got to write something. Everyone else has gone home, needs to be on the boss's desk tomorrow morning. What are they going to do in that situation? They're going to kind of revert back to how they've always written, or they're going to look at those 4 adjectives: human, friendly, warm, and approachable, and they're going to say, hey, that doesn't mean anything.
Mhm.
So actually, when you look at brand language, we see that it always works on 3 levels. Uh, if you look at a great piece of copy from a brand that you really love, you can often just put your hand over the logo at the bottom, show it to someone, hide all the other elements, show it to someone, and they'll say, oh yeah, I know who that is. That's such and such a brand. So what's happening there? When we look at it at the kind of 10,000 foot level, there's an overarching narrative. What's coming out, it's not explicit, but what's coming out of the copy, the brand language is, this is the world that we believe in. This is the world this is how we want the world to be. And that's as strong in B2B businesses as it is in B2C businesses. We want to do this. We want to make the world like this. So therefore we stand for this and we stand against that. Now, in a really strong voice, that sense of their worldview comes out really clearly. That's at 10,000 foot. And at 1,000 foot, then you have the personality. So you almost imagine what kind of people wrote this, or if I walked into their building, what kind of people would they be? Would they be really formal? You and I are wearing white shirts today. Would they be really formal, white shirt kind of, but not too tightly done up kind of people? Or would they be more relaxed, t-shirt, jeans, kind of, whatever kind of attitude to life? And what's in between all of those spaces? So at 1,000 foot, you've got the tonal values, the personality defined. And at the ground level, then, in a really good brand voice, you'll have what we call the ground level details. So they're the things like, what are the words and phrases you use and don't use in this business on a regular basis? Mm. I'll give you an example from the consumer world. You know the Mini car, Eric? Yeah. It's a great brand, hugely successful brand. All the time when they're writing, and I think it's probably on their social media channels, in CRM, everywhere I've seen it, there's this phrase that comes up again and again, which is go-kart handling. Mm. So Minis picked this phrase because it perfectly captures their personality, that 1,000 foot level, and their overarching view of the world. But as a phrase in itself, it's pretty good for representing who they are. And so they'll use it again and again. And so the words and phrases you use at ground level are important, along with things like sentence length and grammar. So, I was taught grammar in a really formalized way, but that's not how I speak and that's not how I write. Yep. And if you listen to people on the street, their grammar is totally different. It's not wrong, it's different. Yeah. So I think what we're trying to get people to understand is even things like grammar choices really matter. So you've got these 3 levels, and in a really great brand voice, they'll all work together and they'll all reinforce each other. And once you've defined them like that, what you find is that it's a lot easier to talk to your team, talk to writers and non-writers about what they're doing with the language. And don't forget, that's not just brand language or comms language. It can be investor relations. It can be, as I say, customer service. It can be even signage in a building. Mm. It's a lot easier to talk to them about that once you've got those 3 levels agreed and defined, and it helps shape things. So you asked me a question about 5 minutes ago, and I didn't answer it, Eric. I'm really sorry.
No, you did. And I appreciate you setting up that framework, because I think it helps give some context to what we're talking about. Because sometimes, in my mind, what comes to mind is, when you listen to a CEO speak, maybe at an investor conference, and And, all of a sudden the word synergy pops into the conversation. You're like, this guy is going to be saying a whole lot of nothing for the next half an hour, because they're trying to avoid specifics and talk in generalities and things like that. But it doesn't really communicate much of anything. And then I think of politicians as well, who oftentimes, walk around a question with a lot of verbose language, but never actually answer the question that was asked. And what you're really talking about is not that. You're really talking about trying to create something that communicates what a brand stands for in the tonality, in the language that it uses, not what they don't stand for or what they don't want to talk about.
Yeah. And exactly right. And of course, the other expression we have, everyone is talking about at the moment, is pivot. Eric, have you pivoted this week? Because it's been 72 hours since I pivoted, so I feel like I'm behind.
You are behind. Yeah, I've done it twice today already. Yeah.
So, and a good example of a company using this kind of language is Alphabet has this wonderful place over in Mountain View, Silicon Valley, called X, which is their moonshot factory.
Okay.
And their moonshot factory is doing all of these things, which I would say, you'd be crazy to think you can do that in technology, but they're proving you can. So they're hosting these ideas, technology-based ways of changing the world, changing significant problems. So Waymo, the driverless car, is coming out of there. So people will know that. But there's other projects that they've nurtured quietly, secretly, for years and years and years until they're ready, like a contact lens, which will constantly monitor your blood glucose level. So what a wonderful place. And their challenge when they talked to us was, look, these are top secret projects. We're not hiding anything, but just because the nature of the project, what it is, we don't talk about it until we're actually successful with it. So their communication challenge was really, we need to be able to express exactly who we are, communicate all of our values, but in a really narrow bandwidth, because really the only times that we'll communicate to the outside world are through recruitment.
Okay.
Because Eric comes to X, he's got this great idea for this piece of technology that will solve a world's problem, one of the world's problems. And you're going to be in there for 8 years, and slowly you're going to be acquiring the world's best minds onto your team. And that's the only thing you can communicate. So it's almost like the ultimate test in a B2B environment, because it's so narrow, but you have to be so precise. And what they said to us, what the leaders at X said to us was, what we're trying to do is attract the best minds in the world to come and work with us, literally, with such a narrow bandwidth of communication. And we're trying to persuade those people that they don't go to NASA, they don't go to MIT, they don't go to these big cash-rich VC-backed places, but they come and work for us. So really, when we understood a lot more about X and their view of the world, we were able to create a voice. We were able to say, this is the world they want to create. So these are the things they stand for. What they stand against, often you can make it explicit. You didn't need to make it explicit for X. But, they weren't interested in kind of quick investment, quick return, they're interested in changing the world for the better. In terms of then what their personality is, that kind of patience and intelligence that comes down from that worldview, that became the values for their brand voice. So without going into the kind of confidential details of how their brand voice was defined, what we saw at the 10,000 foot level, we could bring down into a personality at 1,000 foot. And then we could say, okay, what are the words and phrases you want to use on a regular basis? How do you want to be with your grammar? How much jargon do you want to use? Things like that. So we were able to define the voice, and suddenly what we find is it unleashes creativity. So even in a narrow bandwidth like that, where you're really talking mostly in communication, mostly in recruitment, excuse me, but of course, social media as well.
Sure.
But what you find is that suddenly your writers go, oh, okay, right. So if we stand for this, if this is our worldview, we can talk a little bit about this. Yeah, absolutely, you can. We can. Everyone is talking about climate change, but knowing what we stand for, what we stand against, we can take this angle on climate change, which is our informed angle. And suddenly knowing what to talk about, what angle to take on it, what personality to convey through it, and also getting away from some of the things that slow you down, like what word or phrase do we use? Having all of that unleashes a huge amount of creativity. And I think we were able, I mean, they were a super team. I mean, like the best team you ever want to work with. And they were able, once we'd helped them define their brand voice, to suddenly step change the amount of communication and how fast things can be turned around inside the business.
You know, as you gave that example, something comes to mind. You know, we're recording this episode in mid-September, and I just got done watching earlier this week an Apple event where they launched their new iPhones. And, you know, we always tend to use Apple as marketing examples because they're just so good at what they do. And this was another killer presentation that they put together. But what's interesting in the context of brand voice is that there was a time when Steve Jobs got up on stage and he was kind of the brand, right? He was the voice of that brand. But now over the years, they've made a very conscious effort to have lots of different people standing up and explaining the new products and services, but yet they all have to communicate with that same brand voice. And of course, there's a very heavy hand in that. I'm sure it's not, they're not just winging this off the cuff, but as they go from product to product or new announcement to new announcement, there's a very consistent theme. You know, they talk about privacy, they talk about the environment, they talk about the recycled materials that they use and how they're reducing packaging and all this, but it's consistent from one announcement to the next. And that to me is another great example of how that brand voice, that brand identity is filtering through everything that they do. What's your thought on that?
I think you're absolutely right. And of course, the joy, the great thing about having your brand voice defined properly is then you've got it defined everywhere. So if you go into an Apple store, well, you know, guess what? If you go into an Apple store near you or an Apple store near me, they kind of sound like the same business. And that's immensely reassuring. You know, if my phone is busted and I'm near you and I go into an Apple store, wow, they sound the same. So they probably know as much as my local store do. All of that sounds great. And that's one of the most amazing things about Apple, that they have a really clear sense of their voice, but from that, then that voice flows out through all of their business. It's the same kind of clear voice on their website, same kind of clear voice on social. It's pretty impressive.
I know sometimes when listeners, especially if they're smaller businesses, they listen to discussions like this and they say, okay, you're talking about Google, you're talking about Apple, you're talking about Mini. These are big companies with big marketing departments, a lot of resource to be able to throw at a problem like this. I'm a smaller company. I've got a 3 or 4 person marketing team. How should I define my brand voice? Does it even matter? Am I big enough for that even to matter for me? Or should I be worried about other problems? How do you look at this when it comes to businesses of all sizes and shapes and flavors?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think once the brand voice is defined, you're good with the brand voice for 5 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's same really with your visual identity. I mean, I don't know many businesses that would say, oh, we're too small to make our logo consistent.
Yeah.
Or we're too small really to produce our brochureware in the same way, or it doesn't really matter what our website looks like from day 1 to day 5. We're too small. No, all of this stuff matters. And it's the consistency of communication, not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. That consistency builds confidence. So I think whatever size you are, it should be on your agenda. And then how do you go about it? Well, you know, scale your ambition if you're going to scale your resources. But I would say and thank you for kind of giving me a lead to talk about a bit more about the book, Strong Language. What I would say is you can read Strong Language in a weekend, and you can take something into the office on Monday morning and say, look, we're not going to change everything, but look, can we just look at this, look at that, and look at that? And there are some exercises in the book. It's a really practical how-to book. And I reckon if you did that on Monday, if you read it over the weekend and you came in on Monday, by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, your brand voice would have changed a lot and everyone would be aligning with that one voice.
What is so helpful about that, I think, and I speak from personal experience here, is, you know, the economy has changed, right? These big marketing agencies that you used to hire to do work, a lot of that has changed, and we're now in this freelancer economy where you may hire, one person to do a website revision, maybe somebody to help you out with social media or do some graphics or whatnot. And so being able to communicate that voice is so important, because as you're outsourcing work, they don't really know your company. They don't really know kind of what you stand for. You've got to some way give them a template, give them some rules to follow. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially when it comes to writing, right? Getting people to capture your voice is a challenge, especially if you go offshore.
Yeah.
That can be a real challenge because language is just different. You talked about the language people use on the street. It's not wrong. It's just different, but it might not be what you want in a business context.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you're trying to move fast as a business, and you've got a freelancer that's trying to move fast with you. So just taking a moment to say, look, what kind of world do we believe in? We stand for this. We want to create this kind of world. So we're going to stand for this. We're going to stand against that. Okay. So what kind of personality do we have as a business? Okay. So let's just quickly talk about that. And that might exist already in the business. And then if you can agree some of the kind of keywords and phrases that you love and some that you hate, suddenly your freelancer goes, right, I know what we can talk about. I know how we're going to talk about it. I know actually what we're going to put in the copy in different places. We're really good to go. So I think you're right. It's something I hadn't thought about in that way, but we are increasingly dependent on people that we might not see on a regular basis. So actually a business skill is being able to communicate who you are to your partners instantly, and having some kind of definition about who you are, what you stand for, how you communicate that in language is probably more and more important.
We spend so much time talking about things like buyer personas, really identifying who are your buyer personas. But what this sort of reminds me of is this is sort of a company persona. This is your corporate persona that you're really identifying with many of the same kind of traits and attributes that you might assign to a buyer persona.
Yeah, absolutely. And buyer personas work really well when you take the time to scratch below the surface and actually get into the nuance. And if you don't do that with your company's brand language, then you just kind of sound like everyone else. But when you do scratch, I'd say, well, actually, no, we really do believe in this. And I know everyone in our kind of category says we've all got it. Yeah, sure. But actually, our take on this is this. When you've got those kind of things really clear, then everyone in the department, everyone that's writing for you suddenly feels the voice much easier to access. It flows much better. And you actually then, if you don't mind me saying, I reckon you then start saving a lot of money on your communications budgets, those kind of media budgets and everything else. There's a great example from the consumer world. I don't know, Eric, if you are a dairy dodger like me, but I don't have milk anymore. I don't know. I mean, I don't have anything against milk. It's just, it doesn't work for me anymore.
I was born in Wisconsin, the cheese state, so I'm legally obligated to like dairy.
Yeah, I like it, but it just doesn't. I mean, I love cheese, right? It just doesn't work for me. So I now have oat milk in my coffee and in my tea. And what is oat milk? Oat milk, it shouldn't even be called milk. It's oats in water. And there's a couple of brands that sell oat milk, and I've never met anyone that can taste the difference. And one is Rude Health oat milk, and the other is Oatly oat milk. And they're both sold, they taste the same. They're both sold in 1 liter packs.
Okay.
The packs are exactly the same. They're from Tetra Pak. They're sold in the chiller cabinet. They're sold in the chiller cabinet in the same shops, in the same chiller cabinet, on the same shelf next to each other. And the only difference you can really tell is the language that Rude Health uses to describe itself, which is a bit, it's kind of like everyone in our sector talks about being a bit healthier. So we'll just talk about being a bit healthier. If you read what it says on the back of Oatly's pack, particularly if you come from Wisconsin, you're going to be shocked, right? They're taking the battle to the dairy industry. They're saying that whether they're right or not, that's not what we're into here, but they're saying the dairy industry, show us your numbers for your impact on the climate. Dairy industry, show us whether you're good for people or not, as things like this. So they taste the same, they're sold in the same place. The only difference is their language. Rude Health is valued at 70 million pounds, And Oatly was floated this year for 12 billion. It's now worth 13 billion. And the difference is the language, and the language is leading the attitude, and the attitude is reinforcing the language. That's what language does. That's what language is amazing for.
We often talk about this when we talk about things like corporate environments, corporate culture. And is corporate culture just that poster that's on the conference room wall that says our values, or are those values really something that people are living? Is the company actually doing that? I've had a number of guests on the show where we talk about environmental things and this whole movement of greenwashing, where you just simply say that you support this environmental initiative or that, but actually the company is not really involved in anything and could be a toxic polluter, but they're trying to embrace something, and it's inauthentic. And that just sort of gets to the point. It's authenticity, right? You're trying to speak from an authentic standpoint, and if you can, that's where that language really has power.
Yeah, and it's the same for people, and it's the same for businesses. And why wouldn't it be? Because businesses are people. But it's sometimes difficult to be really clear on who am I as Chris West? What do I believe? What's the world I'm trying to create? What do I stand for? Therefore, how do I come across in my personality and things like that? What are my choices? It's difficult for me, right? Yep. So it's no surprise that it's difficult for businesses. But you're a great communicator, and you're very clear on your personality comes across, and that's why people listen to you. Because it's really clear. When you can make those leaps, when you do spend a bit of time looking at your brand voice, and it doesn't have to be a lot, it's not a forever project. When you do that, what you find is, you focus in on what is authentic. The kind of the half secret about us is a lot of people come to us and say, hey, Chris, we've got all of our brand values sorted out, but it's just our language that's not right. And we'll say, sure. But you're happy with your brand values? And they go, yeah. And then we start working with them on the brand language, and about halfway through they go, you know what, Chris, this is really helping us focus more tightly on our brand values. And I go, yeah. And so it should, right? That's the joy of it. The language becomes, as you say, an authentic representation.
And Chris, you mentioned it earlier. You've written a book. By the time this podcast is live, the book will be live and available for purchase. I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit more about that book. What sort of inspired you to write it, and what are people going to find in it?
Thanks, Eric. It was clients that inspired me to write it, because they were saying, well, you're talking about this stuff, Chris, where can I read anything about it? And I was thinking, well, I can't find a book about it. And then we'd go through a project, and they'd say, Chris, I want to tell people what we did. You've written a book, surely, right? You've written a book. Where's the book? And I'm like, I haven't written a book. So for the last 5 years, clients have been saying, where's the book? Where's the book? And I took time last year. There were various things going on, as we know. So I took time and wrote the book. And I'm delighted with it. It's, for me personally, what it's done is, all these bits that were in my head about, we can do this in this situation. This is how you work with this. This is how you achieve the quick wins. This is how you build, this to last forever. This is how you get senior support. Can you prove ROI on doing this? Yeah, let's do it. What are the human? All of these were in my head, and they come up at different times in different projects. And I was able to bring them all down into the book and go, okay, so now they're not in my head anymore. That's great. Well, they are in my head, but they're in the book as well. So that's a relief.
No, that's good. And it sounds like a useful resource. We get lots of authors on the show here, and this is honestly something that is a unique topic, I think, coming at it from a very unique angle. So clearly there was a need in the marketplace for somebody to articulate this. I'm excited that you got a book out, and what a great time to write a book. So for our listeners here, where can they find out more about you, your company, and where they could go ahead and order the book?
Well, thanks, Eric. I mean, I don't expect everyone to rush out. As much as I'd love everyone to rush out and buy the book straight away, they can find me on LinkedIn, Chris West. I've got one of those names. There's probably a few thousand Chris Wests out there. So on LinkedIn is where I publish some of our recent research, some of our recent tips. So if you go onto LinkedIn and you find, look for Chris West Verbal Identity, you should find a man that looks like me. If you go across to Amazon, then from September the 28th, which I think would have happened by the day we go out with this podcast, if you put in strong language, Chris West, then I think you should find my book. If for some reason you don't want to buy through Amazon, then you can buy, you'll be able to buy through Barnes and Noble, a few other sites. If you get stuck wherever you are in the world, then, you know, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I am now going to use clumsy technology to show a picture of the book. You were very kindly setting me up there, Eric.
Yeah,
okay.
perfect. Let's see it.
There we go. Can you see that?
No, we can't.
No, you can't see that. Okay. Well, there we go. Hold on. Why? I tell you why, because there's a big button there marked share. Eric, you know what? No one wants to see a picture of a book. It says strong language.
We
on
will
the
make
front.
sure to put it on the blog so that people can see it. Yeah, it says strong language
okay.
on the front, and then does it have a subheading?
Yeah, the fastest, smartest, cheapest marketing tool you're not using.
That's excellent.
It could also have been a great tactic by us to talk about the book cover and then not show it, so everyone looks in the show notes.
Yeah, it builds some suspense.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I give so much credit to anybody who can sit down and take the time to write a book, because they're valuable assets, a great way to share your knowledge with others. And, you know, that's what we really try to do on this podcast is share knowledge so that people can really up their marketing game. And so, Chris, I'm just delighted that you were able to come on the show today. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And I hope it's a big success. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Thanks for inviting me as well. And I love sharing advice as well. So if anyone wants to find me on LinkedIn, ask me a question, any size business, whatever I can to do to help, I'll do it.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to have all those contact links that you mentioned in the show notes. Chris, thanks so much again.
My pleasure. Lovely to see you, Eric. Take care.